Thank you so much for joining us for LA Tech Week today. I'm Chris Shang. How many of you guys, this is your first LA Tech Week? Oh, that's fucking awesome. And then how many of you guys, this is your first event for Tech Week? Great, thank you for joining us. So I changed the format completely. I was originally gonna do a presentation style. I did that for SF Tech Week last week. But I just kind of like took a moment to think about, when I was starting off as an entrepreneur, what did I really gravitate towards? And it was really about storytelling. So I'm going to come up here. Coco, it's okay. Shh. I'm going to share a few stories. And I've interviewed so many founders at this point. I'm going to share some of their stories as well, and some of my own personal stories. So I'll give you some background about myself. Just because I think that might lend some context as to where these stories are coming from. Again, my name is Chris Shang, and I've been in startups for a little bit over 10 years. I was just looking at my Facebook timeline, and I just saw like that first feed of like my first startup ever, which was with two of my buddies from high school, and we started a online tuxedo rental company called Simple Tux. And before that, I had spent 7 years in TV and film production, and then before that I spent some time in finance. So like every other entrepreneur, probably a very haphazard way to becoming into entrepreneurship. My story is no different in that sense. And what I really loved about that journey when I started that first startup was the epiphany moment of like ideation to like then somebody making a purchase for your idea like 6 months later, and from a stranger, right? And that's when it kind of all clicked in, where it was like, you can pretty much solve for anything or build anything with code and automate it. I didn't really have any other formal background in startups, in business, or anything like that. But it was going through that experience, I really got hooked into that. And that really kind of like peeled into my natural curiosity for just the human psychology of like, why do people buy things? Why do people make a purchase decision? And fast forward to today, and I've been spending 10 years of my life in growth marketing, advising startups, helping founders go from zero to one primarily. And I've encountered so many unique individuals, so many unique founders. By show of hands here, how many of you guys are a founder? Fuck, okay. And then how many of this is your first company? All right. You guys are in for a journey. Yeah, and I'm going to share some stories of those journeys, and then I'll open up for Q&A afterwards. But kind of going back, like I've been spending 10 years in growth marketing, and done 4 startups. I'm on my 4th one right now. The most successful one, because it's probably the most organic to what I have been doing historically. I ran a growth marketing agency for 7 years. Working with B2B SaaS companies, ongoing from 0 to 1. And, I think in all that time, the thing that's kind of like resonated now, kind of looking back on things, is like, why did I decide to do this? And I think really kind of like understanding your why is so critical. It's such a big component around what you're doing. It's not about the why of your business or your product. I think Simon Sinek does a great job of like going into those things, but it's really about your own personal why. And I've thought about this a lot because, I've gone through the whole slew of founder journey of like being broke multiple times, not knowing if my card's going to go through at the grocery store, to being able to make a good living through the agency, having a great lifestyle business, living frivolously at points, and finding that balance for myself. And the why for me has always been like this, again, like that curiosity around human behavior. And I think more deeper than that, it's also, centered around my own kind of like insecurities around not feeling enough and constantly like seeking and trying to improve and be better. I see a lot of founders that are very comfortable being comfortable. And for you guys first-time founders, like this is something that you will understand very quickly. But you have to learn how to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think about like a marathon, right? And in a marathon, you have the top 3 that are going to place. Sometimes you have tens of thousands of runners, right? And then you have the rest that's in the middle of the pack. And the only ones that end up placing are the ones really that kind of like went through the most shittiest and willing to go through the most shittiest of times possible. And if you're starting a business, you're gonna have to be willing to go through some really, really shitty times. And it's not really about your idea. Well, let's take by show of hands. How many of you guys think you guys have a great idea? How many of you guys think you have a unique idea? Great. I guarantee you your idea has probably already been thought of at some point in time. It's all about execution. I'll give you a good example. It's like Elon just spent the past 20 years doing the real life remake of iRobot, right? I mean, he wasn't even subtle about it. He called it We Robot. So it's like, I think of that where, especially around technical founders, I see this happen so many times, which is this idea of perfectionism and trying to make something perfect before they deploy. And the only absolute truth is what the market is willing to pay for and what they're willing to do and what they're willing to take action on. And I think that's kind of like another thing that I've seen a lot of founders kind of get stuck on is just like too long to deploy and make iterations. I've seen founders get stuck on designs of a widget where we don't even know if that user is actually going to take action on that widget or not. You might as well just put something out there that's like a little bit ugly and then see if people are willing to take actions and then adjust accordingly. I think like, again, going kind of to that founder journey and just, thinking through all the different types of people I've met along the way, there's founders out there that I've met, that have, I did a New York Founders Roundtable. This is the first time I'm experimenting with this format, but 2 years ago I experimented with also a different format, which was this idea of bringing founders from all sizes and stages together on a roundtable. And there are like 4 or 5 of them, and they're from post-seed all the way to, we've had publicly traded companies and founders of publicly traded companies that have gone on to, some have gone to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And we kind of pull them together, and we just have a very like distilled, personal, authentic conversation around what their journey has been like. And the New York one that I did earlier this year was super interesting because there's a few, first of all, combined, the 6 founders have raised over $500 million, right? And so by all means, we would think of like that's success as a founder. But a couple of them, as we started kind of going into the stories, a few unique points. There was 3 of them that used to play weddings or bat mitzvahs in the first 2-3 years to get their company off the ground, okay? Another few, 2, one person pointed this out in the very beginning, but said that at one point we were backwards on our payroll and we only had less than $1,000 in our bank account. And then another guy who is the CEO and founder of ActDefense, Noam, which is a huge cybersecurity company, recalled that same experience and having gone through that also. And he's like, I blocked that away in my mind, but I remember feeling like that. We went through that experience. We had less than $1,000 in the bank account. And I recall these moments because these are the times where you have to really dig deep and understand what your personal why is, because if it's financially motivated or like vanity motivated or externally motivated by any way, like you are not gonna be able to sustain. Going and starting a startup or being a founder is a lot like going to war. You just have to realize like the math is already stacked against you. By the show of hands of how many people here are founders, the percentage of you guys that are actually going to raise like venture capital is like less than 5%. And then out of that, those that are going to surpass like 3 years of existence is even more of a fraction of percent of that. So I think you guys have to take into the context, I'm not saying that to discourage you, but it's like going back to that point of the marathon, right? Which is you have to outwork everybody else. Because there is always going to be somebody that has a smarter idea, stronger founding team, willing to put in the hours, willing to sacrifice more than you are, right? And that's where I feel like my insecurity of like not feeling good enough, which stems from having lost my dad to a battle with stage 4 cancer for 10 years, and then having the idea and sense of mortality. I know that's somewhat personal, but in all these interviews I've done with so many founders, it stems back to that personal thing. It's funny, the loss of a parent has been a recurring theme to some of these most successful founders I've actually interviewed. And it's not to say that you have to go there, but I'm just saying when you're in those trenches, in a war, if you're to imagine, like you have the people that are in the trenches with you, And that's really like your camaraderie. That's what you have to kind of be as a resource. And then beyond that, it's going to be, you don't know how long it's going to last. You really don't. Like, I know people probably are in here and it's like, yeah, I want to get to an exit round and I want to go public. But dude, you have no idea how long it's going to take. It might be 3 years, but most realistically, it's going to take 7 to 10. I've seen, like, again, founders that have gone out, maxed their credit cards out, and that's a common thing. And then I've seen others that had, to sacrifice time with their loved ones. But it's, again, all these things has to stem back to your own personal why. What's motivating you? What's keeping you there? And one of the things that I've kind of learned from one of the interviews I've done is the idea, we've all heard passion is so important, right? I think a better trait deeper than passion is actually curiosity. And I mean that because, like, curiosity is like when you start, like, you're eating and you're thinking about the problem. You're sleeping, you're thinking about the problem, you're dreaming. And I've had literal dreams around solving work problems because of it's intrinsic in you to try to figure it out. Passion might be the thing that keeps you in the office, 18 hours, but then you're disconnecting from that. And that's where I feel like you have to find that thing that is uniquely curious to you. And hopefully that wraps around whatever it is that you're building, but find the relatability in whatever it is that you're doing with some more like personal, something more, tugging along more personally. The other thing that I notice is that, how many of you guys are in revenue by show of hands? Okay, so a lot less than the number of people that raise their hands as founders, right? And the other thing I would just say is before even deploying product, before even writing a line of code, it's so important to just kind of like get validation for your idea. This has been preached about through every kind of like accelerator program, but I see very few take action on validating the idea or getting enough validity to it where it gives you the confidence to invest more time and resources being money, back into the idea. And I've seen ones that do that, and I've seen ones that don't, and the ones that don't has a exponentially larger percentage of chance of not making it past the first year. And this is coming from somebody that works with, seed stage companies still as an advisor with Mucker Capital, and I work with 8 to 12 at any given time. And yeah, I mean, we see them come through this program and like we give them advice. We even handhold them to the metrics and to the actions. And you'd be surprised how many people don't take action. And this is something where you have to dig deep around yourself, which is like, why am I not taking action? Right? And I think it stems down to a psychological fear of rejection, failure. It's usually something along those lines because it's like when you give advice to your best friend about like that toxic person that they're dating, and it's wrong, they know it's wrong, everybody that sees it knows it's wrong, but they can't stop for the next 6 months until something drastic happens, right? And I think it's the same thing here. It's like I've worked with companies literally where we said your co-founder is toxic, and we're not trying to shake the boat here, but like this is real, and it's not going to allow you to grow. And they burn 6 months of runway, and then they realize, yeah, I had to let that person go. And that's just one use case, but there are dozens and dozens of those types of use cases. And I'm not smarter than anybody else. Again, I've been at this for 10 years, but I think the fortunate position that I've been in has been the opportunity to be exposed to hundreds of founders. So as a founder, I'm sure you guys understand how difficult it is to crowdsource, run growth experiments, right? It's like at any given time, you're trying to run like 5, 10 experiments, and at that point, it feels exhausting, like you're doing too many things, running around, very chaotic. For me, having the exposure to 8 to 12 companies at any given time, and then stack that over 10 years, like that's given me the opportunity to crowdsource experiments in real time. So I can go through and do 10 across each one and then see access to like 100 different types of experiments, fail 90% of the time, but then circulate back the rest of the stuff that's working. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with all this information. It's not to say that you can't find your own way, you cannot barrel your way through things. There's always that, but I will say that the ones that I've seen that try to do that, it's tough. Even within this room, leverage your peers, right? Leverage other founders, and don't be afraid to pitch your idea. And for you guys receiving those ideas, don't be afraid to say, that sucks. Or like, I'm not your target customer. Or like, I would change this, right? But come at it from a place of like authenticity, not like a place of, just trying to shame somebody, but like really try to dig deep, ask questions. And if you're a founder trying to sell your idea, like you need to figure out who your target ICP is as quickly as possible. Another thing I'll say about founders is that a lot of times, how many of you guys know what a TAM, SAM, SOM analysis is by show of hands? Okay, so fewer than the amount that raises founders. So TAM, how many of you guys are familiar with that? Okay, so majority, right? So TAM is your total available market. It's, to me, a vanity metric. It's something you should share with investors. They want to know you have a market size no less than $1 billion so that they can realize some great exit. But when you're going to market, your product is not going to be perfect. It's not going to be in a place where it can service the full TAM. You're going to have to evolve your market as you evolve your product. And I know that seems very obvious, but I see so many is trying to sell into enterprise right out the gate when you could probably be doing something a little bit more downstream, get some validation, get some more usage, and then kind of like move more upstream from there. So TAM, SAM, SOM is total available market, serviceable addressable market, and serviceable obtainable market. I look at it in timelines. So serviceable obtainable is what I can get today. Serviceable addressable is what I'm going to get in like 6 months to a year from now. And my TAM is where I'm going to go to like 2 to 3 years from now with my evolution of my product, right? And that's going to constantly grow as you grow your product. And the only way you really grow your product is to get users, get customers, get the feedback loop, iterate, right? And then do the things that the majority of them will tell you that they want. Another thing I will just say to look out for is that I've also seen startups will go after the enterprise, and then 80% of their revenue comes from that single customer, and they end up becoming a glorified dev shop. And that's probably not unique to some of you guys here. You may have probably experienced that. And I've seen founders that had to pivot 2-3 times because their product was ultimately not scalable. It was just catered for one specific company. The other thing I will say, like about conviction and just again, like going down and digging deep around being a founder and understanding what that means. You have this relates to me a lot like the entertainment world, where it's like you have the people that go out there, they pursue to become a rock star, or they pursue to become a hip hop star, or like an actor. And it's like we kind of look at them and we kind of like understand, like, yeah, it's going to be shitty, and most of them probably won't make it. But this percentage chances of us all making it is the exact same, right? It's like there's going to be some of us that are going to be like, yeah, they're going to be the Timothée Chalamets or like, the Zendayas of the world out there. And then you're going to have those that are just like working actors that are on that show that you saw from somewhere, right? And that's okay too, because you're making a living. And I think like that's something you have to be thinking about in terms of like what your outcome desired is. I'll give you another story. And then I'm going to open up for questions here in like about 10 minutes. But I have a mentor who has exited 3 times. And first time, his company, he exited for $1 billion. Another was a small exit. And the last one was a $30 million exit to Gusto. And he was the only signature required on that last exit. And he was able to close that deal in 30 days. And the only time that I've actually seen somebody who was financially motivated for starting a startup has been somebody that, and be successful at it, has been somebody who's done this 2, 3, 4 times. And that's what he did. And that was his largest outcome financially. And he told me when I went to go raise for this last round, is that, what are you trying to do? What's the outcome that you're looking for this next startup? I was like, I'd like to go public. And he's like, why? I was like, I think it'd be a good representation for the disruption that we were able to do in this industry. He's like, so you're telling me if I gave you $50 million right now, you wouldn't take it? I was like, wait, no, hold on. I would take it. That's like life-changing money. Now, how many of you guys have thought about that, right? What is the outcome that you're actually looking for? And that was really important for me because then I started thinking about, he's like, yeah, do you really want to raise $10 million? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, you're going to have to exit for at least that for then you to even realize anything. Because we think about, and for so long we thought about like this fundraising activities as kind of like, that's the goal. That's the success and the mark of a good entrepreneur or good founder. And then you see now a lot of these unicorns that have gone backwards, and then go out of business, and the founders don't get anything. If you get any capital when you're like already raised in the excess of the hundreds, that's all going back to your investors. It's all going back to the people on your cap table before your shares that you're going to get. And founders, they don't tell you this shit because they want, it's in their favor, stacked in their favor. Anytime you get external capital, there's a cost associated to that. And you need to remember that, because like if you can bootstrap it, you have some validation around something, do that as long as you fucking can. Because it's only going to, if anything, if you do still end up raising external capital, if anything, it's only going to increase the value of what you can ask for. It's also going to put you in a position where you're not so desperate, right? And that's going to help you close faster. Going back to that story, he told me that, and I said, okay, yeah, so I would sell for $50 million. Okay, I'm going to only go raise a seed round. I'm going to limit it to, we ended up just doing like 1.5, and we don't need to raise anymore. And I own 51% of the company. And I'm so thankful for having that conversation, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't have known to think in that way. And I think a lot of people here probably have been thinking like, yeah, we're gonna go raise our round, we're gonna do a seed round, we're gonna do this. And the landscape has changed a lot. So I think people are maybe more acutely aware of this now, but we're talking about 3, 4, 5 years ago, that was not the case. And I have friends that now literally have to sell for $50 million for them to feel like they've broken even on their time. Like they've been at this for 7, 8 years, and like they might sell for 50 million, but that only equates to like $500,000 for them, which then feels like, okay, yeah, I may be broken even. But that's another instance. Dilution is something that you really have to think about. Before I kind of like went through this like kind of deep seeking founder journey, then I've also been spending a lot of time on growth and just kind of like, how do you acquire customers? And so I'll give you guys a few things around that, because I think that's also valuable. But growth to me is just really kind of optimizing for 3 variables. It's your messaging, your audience, and your channels. And not enough people think creatively enough about that. I think maybe because not enough people have been like, hey, I need to figure out where my customer is so I can monetize, so I can feed myself. When you are stacked up against the corner like that, you get really fucking creative around like, what do I need to do to get customers? It's taken me a long time to figure out that those are the 3 key variables, but I'll give you an example. If I'm selling a consumer good to stay-at-home moms in affluent communities, I might have somebody stand outside of a yoga studio between the hours of 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in Manhattan Beach, for example, right? It doesn't seem scalable, but there's always like an online version of what that physical component is. If I'm selling a SaaS product to general contractors, I might have somebody stand outside of a Home Depot between the hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? Similarly, there is any licensed business, like anybody that needs to be licensed for them to run their business, think cosmetologists, contractors, physicians, short-term property rental owners. If you have to be licensed, there's usually a public database somewhere that's going to allow you access to getting some kind of information, right? And I think that's also helpful, because people don't think about those as viable like points of channel, like a channel to actually use. That's going to give you access points to either like email, phone, social media, like DMs is another channel that people don't think of a lot. But you can actually automate LinkedIn DMs, you can automate Facebook message DMs, Twitter DMs. These are all just opportunities for you to get in front of your target audience and try to collect as much information as possible for you to see, like, is this valid? You should never really target beyond 2 to 3 ideal customer profiles, because you're gonna be scattered. And when I say that is because if you're trying to scale things up, that's centered around messaging. And if you're trying to message too many different types of personas, you're going to be spread way, way too thin, because that needs to be through the entire buyer journey, right? It has to go from not just the email or the phone call. It has to go through the landing page. It has to go through the marketing assets. They all have to line up to whoever it is that you're targeting. So that's on the go-to-market front. I think just the last few more founder stories I think are like helpful just to kind of think about is like, what if I told you, or what if you guys went back to your parents or your friends or your family and be like, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about starting my own business, but I might go to jail, right? Travis Kalanick, Uber, right? That's something that he had to deal with. Not many people realize or think about that, but like, he was going against a system that had been there for decades, right? Which is the taxi and the municipality system. And so that was a very real conversation that he had to have internally, let alone with his investors, with the friends and family. My personal belief is like most rules are meant to be bent if not broken, but you need to be very conscientious around which ones are which, right? But that's again something that's like, if you were to go and talk to most people, would probably deem you as crazy. And genius is only in hindsight, right? It's not like when you're going through that journey that it's really there. The last kind of thing I would say too is, this whole thing is a marathon disguised as a sprint. It's every day is going to feel like you're putting out fires. Every day is going to feel chaotic. Even though I run a profitable business now, we are always constantly putting out fires. And I think if any other founder kind of stepped into my shoes, they would just kind of like be like, this is crazy, right? But I've kind of built up and calloused up that muscle for it to go with the ebbs and flows. I think most people oscillate between like this is the norm of like, this is an extreme high, this is an extreme low, and they just kind of like sit in between there, right? Founders have to be able to oscillate between like this, if not more than that, right? And when that becomes your norm, then you're able to endure a lot more, you're able to tolerate a lot more, you're able to push yourself a lot more. And a tip for me that I've found to be really useful in these past like 10 years has been like constantly doing something that's personally uncomfortable and testing my own physical limits. And that actually makes it a lot easier to tackle the professional stuff that I have to do that's uncomfortable. The easiest things are like the fitness things, right? Like the things that you really have to like be disciplined about, stay accountable with. Test yourself every single day. Try something that's uncomfortable for you or you have a fear of, because I guarantee that is a muscle that can be pushed over and over and over again. And that's the thing that's going to allow you to stand out from the other founders, right? On that note, like I feel like there's hundreds of other stories I can share, but I do want to open it up because last week when I did open up for Q&A, it went a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. I'll take any questions of people here. Yeah, starting with you.
Firstly, thanks for sharing all the stories. My name is Patrick. I'm from Sydney, Australia. And my question's around market validation that you mentioned earlier. What is it that you, as a founder or even as a person who consults with founders, sees that market validation is actually helpful when we go to VCs, but even for ourselves as a founder? Is it qualitative, quantitative? Is it market surveys? I was just getting a product out there in the market and seeing if it works. So what does market validation really mean when you say that?
Yeah. So I think there's the question is around market validation and when do you see that? And I think there's two ways to kind of look at it. So there's one, which is if you're trying to go raise from a VC, they want to see repeatability. So I put in $1 million, I'll see $5 million, right? So you need to get to that place, right? We do X, Y, and Z. We pull on these levers to this audience, again, optimizing for those three channels, those three variables. Then you'll be ready for VC. Product market fit is a little bit different. Product market fit is like you feel more of a pull versus a push, right? And what I mean by that is usually you're pushing your product or your service out there, right? And it feels like you're constantly just pushing and pushing and pushing. Pull is when all of a sudden you get a customer, you don't know where the hell they came from. That's market validation. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, more a recruiting question. I'm a 3-time founder now working with a Japanese company like travel subscription to bring them to the US. And my first hire needs to be like head of marketing, growth hacker that could really validate a foreign product and test. And so going after that person. So I, job post, I have my network. Any tips for finding that first hire of marketing who's gotta have that experience? Like I've done this 0 to 1 before.
So I don't care if they've done it before. And the reason why is because, look, if you're selling financial services where it's like a commoditized product, it makes sense to bring in somebody that's done it before because the process is going to be very similar. When you are building a startup or tech, something innovational, like it's going to usually be like a green pasture, white space situation where it's never really been done before. And so more important than if they've done it before is the mindset. So do they have the testing mindset? How quickly are they able to kind of go out and validate certain things? How creative are they around, again, those three variables of channel, messaging, and audience? But that's what I would look for. Somebody that is like data driven and understands then like how to run the experiments to get that data to then find the things that you need to be spending your time on.
Any sources for that, like where those people are?
I mean, referrals are the best way, right? And then I would say second to that would be like LinkedIn. Yeah. Yeah, Kai.
Hey, thanks for sharing your story. It's been amazing insight. First off, I had a question. Based on your findings with the interviews with founders, where do you see on the spectrum on skin in the game? Meaning, how many times do you see founders putting actual money into it, and what percentage, what amount, and how does that affect the capital raise going forward?
Yeah. So I would break that down by the ones that are successful, and by successful, I'm just going to say like they make it past the 2-year mark of running their business. Not even talking about raising external funds or anything like that, but just longevity of business. And the ones that have made it to the 2-year mark or longer, all have skin in the game, like 90-some percentage of them, right? Very few have I ever seen where it's like we raised or we started getting like external capital, unless you're like doing, this is different between like small business owners, I think. Like, so small business owners where you're doing like a physical brick and mortar, like it might make more sense to do like a small business loan and do that. But like if you're talking about like true startup where it's like building something that's truly scalable, that's where I think like having skin in the game financially is going to be a big part of it. I mean, something that VC funds don't tell you is like when you make it to partners, like you have to have your own skin in the game also, and they have to put in their own capital to become a partner because that's going to help build the confidence around the rest of the LPs and then the rest of the partners that you're not there just as a tourist. And the same thing here. I think, if you're going in to try to raise capital or you're trying to go in and sell a customer, like you just got to think about it as like, would you be confident to go and sell this to your family member and that they would give you money for it? Because if not, then you probably need to go back to the drawing table. But if you are, then you probably have a good chance of like getting to the outcome desired.
Well, just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
so, I mean, do you see founders not having skin in the game, and how does that affect them? Because you've seen a lot of founders.
Yeah. So some, I would only say like the times that it's worked out well is like if it's a deep tech product where it's going to require like, 2 to 3 years of building something in order for them to deploy, and then like those are the use cases that I've seen where it's actually made sense. Back.
Yeah, great talk. So I was in Palo Alto during the original .com boom and bust and working as a securities lawyer. And the major thing that I see is, besides COVID and globalization, anti-globalization, has changed the AI environment with speed to market. You talked about 7 years, 3 to 5 years with hiring IT, and hasn't the startup building environment, operating environment changed incredibly in the last 2 years because of
Yeah.
cameras and
Yeah.
ChatGPT and so how does that affect our opportunities going forward, and where do you see the world? And this is a big question, I know. Where do you see the world 3 to 5 years from now, and where are the market opportunities that will leverage AI,
Yeah, man.
robotics?
It's a fucking loaded question. I have my own personal beliefs on it. A little bit conspiracy theory, but I don't know. Okay, so I guess there's 2 parts to that. I think one is, yes, AI has allowed you to build a lot faster, deploy a lot faster, give access to non-technical people the ability to build things. However, I kind of equate this to sales enablement AI. And I think we can all kind of agree that our inboxes and our LinkedIn DMs are now bombarded with a bunch of shit that looks like it's generated by AI. I think similarly, software or SaaS, is going to be very similar. You're going to see a lot of noise of things that get populated into the market that actually may or may not make sense, or may or may not have a market for it. I think what we're going to see is a lot of companies like Klaviyo that ends up like building things internally, building their own CRMs, building their own customer service portals, customer support bots, things like that. I think that's going to happen more. So I think the opportunities, though, is that we kind of get wrapped up around this living on the coasts, right? Like living in LA, living in SF, and living in New York, or living in big cities. Like the adoption curve is actually still pretty steep for the mass audience of the world. And I think about it like, only 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I was in like the Midwest in a small town, and like I couldn't find an Uber, and that's been around for 10 plus years. And I think like we have to realize some of these things are going to be slow to adopt commercially, or really kind of like reaching like this mass adoption. So I think there's opportunities, and there's still going to be opportunities, because like we're going to go really far into thinking like AI is going to do all these things, and then we're going to pull back to realize it's not doing all those things great yet. And I think we're kind of seeing that now, and it's kind of playing out now. And on the flip side, the conspiracy theory, just to share that, I feel like it's a little bit dangerous now with all the things that we have from a product perspective that has AI. And I think about all of these big players like Uber and Google and Facebook and like all these things are scary to me, because like these are all devices where forward facing appears to be one thing, but it is collecting data, and data is gold. Data is very, very valuable. And I can see us ending up into like, Terminator, if we just keep feeding these things without thinking about it. And again, when you think about like the majority of the population out there, I don't think they understand when you're allowing cookies to happen. Most of you guys probably know what that means now and here, but most of your family members don't know what that means when you're just allowing. And they make it difficult for you to opt out of those cookies, by the way. You notice that? So it's like we're building things, but I think also other people are building things to try to get more information, and that information will just, the younger that it goes, will, unfortunately having more control over independent thinking, I think, and we'll see where it goes. Yeah, a lot of questions. Let me just get you real quick.
Scale questions. For those companies that would do it smartly, intelligently, what have been like some of the common themes and threats of that?
So ServiceTitan's a good example. They're a $1 billion company, and they're a mucker company. They went through phases. So phases of like 1 to 2 years, something working, then it stopped working. So like they first started off and Google Ads was working really, really well for them. This is like 8 years ago, right? So, but then it stopped working, and then they had to pivot, and then they had to go into building out full stack sales teams. That started working, then stopped working, and then they had to go to doing more product led, and then that started working. And now, it's not that you stop all those things, but you start combining those as part of your go-to-market mix. You start trying to figure out, like, it all boils down to like unit economics, right? Like, how much does it cost me here? How much does it cost me there? And you try to figure out the mix of that pie for you to try to get as much of that market as possible. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any tips or something about pricing strategy?
Pricing strategy? That's tough. Like, I think there's a science behind it, and that's not my strength or forte, but I think in the very early days, it's kind of like just looking at what your competitors are doing, try to figure out, what the comparables are, and then try to go from there as a starting point. I think it's also like now it's going to be interesting because pockets are tight, and I don't think people are that like. I think the subscription model is going to be tough nowadays, and I see a lot of companies try to switch to usage. Salesforce just did that with their AI agents. It's more on a usage basis. Obviously, it's really still early to tell, but like, yeah, I think people are just becoming more privy to like, I need to see like tangible ROI from whatever it is I'm buying, and I need to see it as quickly as possible, or I'm going to like churn. Yeah, back there.
Hi, I'm not a founder, I'm a brand designer. I'm curious about, like, if you could share how you think founders should approach, like, brand identity through different phases of their journey. Like, what you've seen, based on your
Yeah,
experience.
I think, yeah, I get what you're saying. So my specialty is on B2B side, where I don't think it really matters. I think, again, you have to deliver value. I think on the direct-to-consumer side of things, that is the go-to-market. That is really important because people are buying for intrinsic value, perceived value, right? It's like, and to me, when you're building brand on the direct-to-consumer side, I mean, similarly, I do this with B2B because I think it mirrors one another. Like, we buy from people. And so it has to evoke an emotional trigger. And even on the B2B side of things, like when we do messaging, I will have that bucketed as like the different emotional triggers. It's a little bit different than, would be like for consumer goods, but, things like urgency or FOMO, those are things that we try to kind of figure out, or time sensitivity. Like, how can we use that type of thing to then understand what that particular market is really going to be responsive of? I think the testing ideology still applies, meaning like you can still like do, usability tests with different groups to understand which segment you're trying to target actually adopts or like reacts to it the way that you want to. I would also just say as a caveat to that is like, remove your ego. And I think like that's hard for a lot of founders, and something I learned from entertainment too, by the way, which is like, actors and like entertainers are great entrepreneurs. They have all the soft skills required to be a great entrepreneur, but the ego is what usually gets in the way because they're betting on the wrong horse, which might be themselves. And I think similarly in design, it's like, or even like from a technical perspective, when I talk to technical founders, it's the same thing. It's like they feel it's very much an art. It's very much like personal to them, but the market is absolute. Yeah.
I'm a first-time co-founder, and I'm pitching in 2 hours. And
Good for you, man.
I have an ICP, MVP, like a $4 billion market, testimonials. Like I think I have everything. However, the one thing that I'm missing is the technical co-founder.
Yeah.
But I'm getting like the invitations for the meetings, right? So I pitched for this guy a couple weeks ago. So I'm getting all the invitations, but that's the one piece that I don't have. Yeah.
Got it. I don't think it's critical to get a technical co-founder. One of the red flags is if you have a co-founder that is not aligned with you. So I don't think it's not that important. I think if you're a solo founder, but you can go raise capital, or you can deploy capital to, like your own capital, to getting a technical team or the technical resources to build it out, you're fine. I think you can go hire a CTO at some point in time, so that's fine. I wouldn't look at it as a weakness. I would try to figure out how to turn it to a strength. And I would also just not get one for the sake of getting one. Does that help?
What was that last part again?
I would not get one just for the sake of getting one because you think that that's what you need. Don't do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm the founder of Pitch. Being a part of Mucker, what really makes a candidate stand apart when they're applying?
Scrappy. Like that's one we call ourselves like a blue collar VC, and I really believe that. Like we look at founders, we're agnostic when it comes to verticals. We do direct to consumer just as much as we do like B2B, but we look for founders that has skin in the game, have exhausted all resources and they're stuck, and capital is the only kind of constraint for them to grow or get to the next level, and those are the kinds of founders we look for. Not somebody that's going to go hire against the problem. That's one other thing I would just kind of like say is like, I see a lot of founders that will go hire a VP of sales way too early, and then they go burn through 3 VPs of sales in like the first year. It's a very common tale. And they end up spending a lot of money, if not going out of business because of that. I believe that truly like every startup or especially on the B2B side, has to be founder-led sales in the very beginning. And that's one thing that we would look for. If you are like not a founder-led sales team or don't know what your sales process looks like, that's a red flag. And that's because if you're hiring against the problem, you don't even know what to measure. Like you don't even know what success looks like, let alone what failure looks like, right? And so like if I'm able to drum up like 10 customers over 3 months, I should expect a VP of sales to do the same thing. And the ones that are hiring against that like are basically like say, arbitrarily dictating some kind of metric that if they fall short, they get they let them go, but they don't even know if that was like a good good metric to use or not. So yeah.
Financial modeling question.
Yeah.
So for a pre-seed, pre-revenue, proof of concept stage, how much weight do you put on financial modeling for 3 years out? Have you given advice on both sides? Model everything out 3 years. Other advice, just focus on the next year, focus on revenue, focus on
I mean, I think you have to be able to model out for 3 years, right? Make some key assumptions around what that means. But yeah, beyond the first year, like we all know, it's kind of just throwing darts at a dartboard. There's a lot of things that can happen, but when it boils down to it, it's really kind of like it's when you go into those first jobs, right? Like out of graduate school or undergrad, and like they give you those trick questions. That's kind of how I look at that. Like the financial models, like we want to understand how you think about it. We want to understand what kind of assumptions you've modeled into it, and why did you put those assumptions in. That's more important. The critical thinking component of it is more important than the actual accuracy of the model. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm popping off that push-pull question. How do you work with founders who think their market doesn't yet have that need? Like they're pulling together other needs, insecurities, or desires, and they're like, well, there's this new product, this thing out there. I'm basically venting that need, and maybe
Yeah.
they'll eventually have it, but they're in the testing phase.
Yeah, I got you. So I would evaluate for two things from whatever your proposed market is, or try to figure out what those different segments of the market you're trying to target. They could look very different, which is fine. But you're trying to understand is like, how big is the pain that you're solving for? Right? Well, first of all, do they have the pain that you're solving for, and how big of a pain is it on a scale, right? If they scale it like on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being an extreme pain, and 4 to 5, majority of them are saying a 4 to 5, they'll pay you something for it. If it's a 1 to 2, you're gonna have a tough time. Back.
Hi, thank you for sharing your journey. I'm sorry for your loss. My question is a bit more personal and like, how do you think you have evolved in your journey, and have you shown up differently as a founder after that?
How have I evolved as a founder from my personal experience?
Just going through grief and loss.
Going through grief and loss, I mean, so it's, it wasn't new to me that before I even started in startups, I had already lost my dad. This is like 16 years ago, he passed. And so I think what more it really kind of like shed a light on, and I actually just did a podcast with Eric Huberman, who also went through something similar, and he has, Hawk Media, which is one of the, if not the largest digital agency right now out there. He went through the loss of his dad, and we both talked about this idea of mortality. And I think the mortality thing is like super interesting, and I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Is like we all have a finite time here on Earth, right? It's like we might as well do it with the things that we are uniquely curious about, that we're really interested in. He's constantly pushing himself to do more things than he has to do. Like it's not about like what most people would look at now, which is like a financial outcome or like happiness scale or personal time off or vacation mode or whatever it is we kind of think about. He's fulfilling his own like true intrinsic curiosity around the different things that he's doing and working on. And I think that's for me like the same thing is like I'm going to be spending my entire 2025 in Europe, like half personal because I want to spend some time in blue zones and understand like why do people live to 100 plus years old in these areas. I've been very capitalistic for 10 years. I'm good right now. And so kind of spending my time doing that. But in between that time, I also found ways to fill also my professional curiosity, which is like, I'm also gonna be spending time with our customers, which we have in Europe, working with VCs that I know I have relationships with different parts of Europe. So I'll be making that connection. And for me, it's like understanding what the go-to-market looks like in Europe. If I wanna conscientiously grow a business there, what does it look like? Because it's so drastically different than it is here. But it's all tugging on those things, and I can now craft a life and lifestyle against those curiosities, which again stems to that idea of like personal and connection to mortality. Back.
Yeah, so I would love almost a diagnosis from you on my situation. So I am a startup founder. We sell the film producers, scheduling software like call sheets and crew management. I started in 2016. We've been bootstrapped all the way. We haven't raised any outside funding. And I think I have a bit of an insecurity that we may have bootstrapped like too long, or like we have product to market, we have customers, we've got some enterprise customers. So on paper, we look really good, but we're still very small. And when I share with investors that I've been doing this for like 8 years, and then I share our revenue, they're kind of like, oh, okay. So do you have any advice for people who are in that boat? Like maybe you have too
The
much
size of
skin
your
in the
market
game?
may not be large enough,
Yeah.
right? And if that's the case, you just kind of have to evaluate, again, the outcome that you're looking for. Can you create a lifestyle business? Can you be a solo employee or solo entrepreneur? Can you have like 2 employees and run the business? Like what are the economics of your business to just sustain those customers and go slowly, right? That's an option. There's no shame in building a $7 million a year business, dude. Like,
Right.
I think it's really kind of like, but if you're like trying to build a $700 million a year business in a $7 million a year market, that's where you're going to be frustrated.
Yeah.
Yep, back there.
So my startup right now, we have product market fit. We're cash flow positive. It's bootstrapped up to this point, and so now we're trying to pull different growth levers, different channels. We just set up our affiliate program. Got affiliate payment this morning. That was nice to see. Now I'm trying to figure out, because of limited resources, like how much should we? We've already done an analysis on content marketing and SEO potential, and we think it's good, but I understand that's a bit of a long game. How would you, in my situation, think about all the different channels and how to prioritize them?
Yeah, I mean, the go-to-market's changed a lot in the past year. And so, again, like pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Also, the sales enablement stuff has made our attention be more scarce. And so the trust building is so important. And building relationships are so important to kind of get customers. I think the long tail stuff like SEO, things like that make a lot of sense. But I also think everybody should be doing a podcast or a webinar, because that's a great way to target your customer in a different way than hopping onto a sales conversation and building trust with them. Like I do that all the time, and majority of our vendor signups is coming in through the people I had as the guests on the webinar. And I don't even have to ask them to do it. A lot of the times they're asking, so what do you guys do? And so it organically kind of comes across, and it doesn't feel so salesy. There are times I will follow up with them to try to push the more sales initiative, but it just depends. I think you just got to find out the right cadence of things. I'll also share this with everybody, but I have like growth playbooks of things that like I run people through, and real quickly, I'll just kind of think about it this way, but like, let's just say, for example, your total market is like 1,000 customers, right? So what I usually do is I'll take 1,000 customers, I'll divide just like by 5, and so it'll be like 200 in each cohort. I'll have 5 cohorts of 200 each. So if I'm starting today, I'll start doing outreach to that first cohort of 200 people, and I might start off with just like some kind of like education stuff, like this is what we do, and not even worry about converting. And then I'll go through that every week, right? And then week 6, I'm going to come back to cohort 1 again, right? And I'm going to try a different message. Maybe I'll focus more on sales, right? Hey, by the way, I mentioned what we do. Would you mind hopping on a call? And then the next time I go around, I might do like, invite them to be a guest on the podcast. Next time I go around. The idea is that over time, you're getting to a binary answer from your target market, right? Which is really the critical part of it. And to me, like getting a no is just as important as getting a yes, especially if you can figure out the reason for the no, and then start quantifying the objections and the reasoning for those objections. That's useful information for you because it can help you prioritize your product roadmap, helps you with rebuttals with your sales team, tons of value in that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question on, initially you had talked about deploying kind of the ugly thing and deploy quickly, often and early. And I completely agree with it, but how do you balance deploying that maybe not so pretty thing as early as possible, or certain features of your product as much as possible, versus kind of diluting your brand, or people saying, oh, well, I don't like that, and now I'm going to churn because how do you like message it, or how do you deploy it in a way where people are still with you?
Yeah. What kind of product is it?
It's a cloud-based
Okay.
platform. You upload a floor
Okay.
So A and B designers.
Yeah, I got you.
They like the beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in those cases, you got to figure out what the right balance is for your
Yeah.
market, right? And to that point, which is, I mean, I think of like Notion.
Yeah.
Notion is like such a simple, clean design, and then there's an art to simplicity. So I think what I would try to figure out is like, what is the amount of resources that you need to actually get to the outcome that that's desired, right? And sometimes less is more. And is there a way to make it so that you don't have to allocate as much resources to it to be able to get the outcome, right? I think sometimes we get wrapped up in design because we're trying to make it so intricate. And that sucks up a ton of resources, right? Versus trying to do it more simple and just streamline it. But that said, figure out what works for your market. And I think like you can also just take small samples of who your target market is and put it in front of them, see how they react, right? It's not hard to put a Figma file and use that and get like 5 people to give you feedback.
Have
And
our little test user
exactly.
groups.
Yeah, and then break it up to the different groups that you want to target and to see who gets furthest along. And that's the gamification of trying to do the usability studies. Yeah. So, cool. Yeah.
I want to piggyback on yours.
Yeah.
We're in a similar situation where we're making a product that we know we've demonstrated it can work. We could release it, but it's not our perfect, and we don't want perfect to be the enemy of progress for us. But at the same time, it's artistic and it matters to
Yeah.
us that there's a certain quality and elegance to what we're putting out there. That people don't get the wrong idea that we just
Yeah.
threw something out.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So the limiting factor here is time and money, right?
Yeah.
So you're either going to run out of money and you're not going to be able to deploy,
Right.
right? And you're just going to sunk cost. Or you have indefinite amount of time, meaning you guys can continue to iterate on this thing until it gets to a certain stage and then roll it out. And there's really only 2 ways to get money, which is like get customers or go raise money, right? And you're going to have a difficult time raising money outside of like a friends and family round, people who are willing to take a risk on the idea. Any type of institutional money is going to want to see, again, like some form of market fit or repeatability or your first few customers, understanding how you got those first few customers. So you need to find that, right? Like that to me is like, going back to your question, is like looking at those 2 variables of time and money. You can either have an indefinite amount of time or like you can extend your time, or like with the money, like you have limited amount of that mostly. You need to figure out how to leverage those 2 things in a way that gets you to the next step. Does that make sense?
It does. Just when you say the next step, that's the thing that sort of feels like it's on the scale backwards, right? What is the next step? Because we can go put something out.
Yeah, so to me the next step is literally like go and find on LinkedIn or find wherever your audience is, like find 10 people to go look at your product right now.
We have.
Okay,
We have done that. We just haven't done it for
why
money.
not? That's the next step then. See if they'll pay for it. Yeah. Okay, we're rounding up on time, so I'll take like 2 more questions right there real quick.
For VC, they always ask for like the market size, right? Is there a range of market size that is like a good like market is like 1 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion, or is it more like, let's say it's 1 billion, but you capture 80% of that market? Like, what is the range usually?
I think if you're going to raise VC money, like you just have to go ahead and you have to have a narrative to get you to that $1 billion market, like that $1 billion TAM. And we already know the percentages like are like minimal, but that's what we're also playing. We're playing that game. So I think you just have to have a narrative that kind of gets you to the $1 billion TAM. Yeah. Yeah.
Out of the founders that you've worked with or that you know of, what would you say are the top characteristics of the founders that actually make it?
They're great sellers, like they're great salespeople, and I'll say that I've met technical founders where it's not intuitive to them, but they are willing to learn, and those ones are like amazing because they have no ego about themselves. They're like, yeah, I didn't know that, so I picked up these books, and then they read about how to become a great salesperson. Those are the strongest founders, or like the ones that come from like a technical background and then pick up on the salesman skills. But yeah, great sellers, like really understand how to encapsulate like the human condition in terms of like what they're doing.
Quickly on Chris, thanks for the talk. Great fundraising. Capital market has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. What would you say is the landscape right now in terms of seed funding, pre-seed, and differentiating between angels versus VCs?
I just see a lot less like Series A money going out there. I think like getting accelerators, going through an accelerator, like getting like pre-seed, seed money is like still there, and growth capital is still there. So I think it's just harder to like, yeah, it's harder for those companies that, you know, to go raise that 10, 12, 15 million. It's more harder on that front. I think we saw like inklings of it changing, but I really like when I'm talking to founders that are in a position to do it, it's just having a hard time doing it.
Maybe just a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Angels versus accelerators, especially when we're talking about maybe some $1 million raise.
I mean, I think that's a personal preference. Like, if you just want to be heads down and you already kind of know what you need to do, angel is fine. Like, I think that's a good way to go. You're just going to get like a lot less like, you know, voices around you. But accelerators, I think, has great value in the sense of if you need help, if you like don't know what the next step is, if you're kind of like feeling a little bit stuck, I think it'd be a great motivator and also just kind of like a great external thing to push you to do more uncomfortable stuff that you may not normally do. Yeah. Last question. All right.
Brian Portage, Easy Shake is like a Keurig system for protein powder shakes. Question is related to hardware product launches. Is there any key indicators that you would recommend on whether or not you should try and raise small, start small, and grow up, as opposed to raising large and trying to roll out large? Because obviously there's a larger upfront capital investment to hardware products.
I think that's also again a personal decision, right? Like, if you have market fit and you know you can go raise a large round, do you want to go dilute that now? Meaning, like, if you can go sell it for $100 million in 5 years, you want to give up 30%? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Versus taking less and like giving away 10%. So it's really depending upon like how much conviction you have about the outcome and the market fit to determine what you want to do. Yeah. Cool. I thank you guys so much for coming out and listening for this talk. Hopefully it was valuable.